What is it? Taking away residents' rights to vote by removing their names off of the voting registry. The government has, in many recent instances, purged or removed names from voter registries in different states, ultimately taking away people's right to vote. This issue has disproportionately affected Black, brown, and low-income people as a result of the use it or lose it stance many officials take, meaning that if you haven't voted for a few years, they purge your name. Without it being said, the purging of names can take away access to voting for whole groups of people, making it easier for candidates that appeal to wide and high-income communities to be voted into power. Perjury was made to prevent voter fraud when people manipulate the polls by, for example, entering another person's name and using their vote as well. This is a nearly non-existent issue. But the act of purging removes the chance of someone taking the name of someone dead, out of state, or inactive. This is how purging a voter is justified, because the officials thought voter fraud could transpire from their inability to make it to polls. States want to clean up lists and remove people who have died or left the state. People are using their privilege and power to remove eligible voters from the registry. This is for their own benefit, making it easier for candidates that are wide and from high-income communities to be voted into power. Perjury affects minorities because they aren't able to leave their jobs to vote. This is why they are inactive voters, because they haven't exercised their right because they need to earn their money. It also targets minorities because they are less likely to vote for conservative Republican candidates. This is why purging is thought of as a Republican benefit, because getting rid of voters considered Democrat, the ratio of voters in their favor increases. We looked up #voter suppression and found. Reminder. Alert. Georgia is doing it again. Purging voters just because they haven't voted in a while. Does your driver's license expire because you don't drive every day? Your voting registration should never expire unless you die. Indiana purges 460,000 voters. Georgia is freezing 50,000 newly registered Black voters. North Dakota is disenfranchising thousands of Native Americans. Florida's voter registration site went down 2 days before the deadline, and they never fixed it. Republicans cheat to win? Our response to the social media posts was, voting is a basic human right that shouldn't be so easy to take away. And we think that this is unfair. Just because you haven't voted in a while doesn't mean the option and your right should get erased without consent. Our first article talks about a federal judge backing up Georgia's move to remove 100,000 inactive eligible voters from their registry. It was ruled that the Fair Fight action did not prove this violated the Constitution. Our second article talks about Republicans-controlled state legislators have been purging state voter rolls. In Ohio, 235,000 people were purged. In Kentucky, 175,000 people were purged. The problem is that the process is flawed and politically motivated and results in the disenfranchisement of registered voters, usually Democrats. The Democratic Party have focused on the opposite idea: allow everyone to register to vote the same day they go to vote. It made sense to purge people's names if they are dead or have moved, but not when they are still alive and eligible.
Hundreds of thousands of names have been removed from the voter register since changes to the system were introduced by the government. Joining me for more now is Will Baker. He's director of the Human Project. It's an organisation promoting democracy. Will, why the fuss when the government actually says all of these people are either dead, they've moved, or they didn't exist at all?
Well, this was a reform that definitely needed to happen, because the idea of householder registration was really quite archaic. You know, really, individuals should take responsibility for registering and for voting. The problem is that, yes, there were definitely some out-of-date names there, people who were dead, people who'd moved on, but it seems that a lot of people who were eligible to vote have been swept up in this. And actually, the government had until December this year to introduce these changes, and it actually chose to carry out the deletion in December last year, which means that plenty of people who could have had the time to think about this or become aware simply don't know about the change.
Is it a fact, perhaps, that they couldn't be bothered? I mean, it's a question of individuals registering and not households or maybe halls of residence. So
Yeah.
it's up to the individual to do this.
Yeah, of course it is. There's always some people who won't be bothered, but there's a great deal of poor voter engagement at the moment, and we see that in every single general election. There's particularly worryingly low levels of voting engagement from young people, and really what we
An
should
apathy, then, in politics, is that what you said?
Well, it's not necessarily an apathy, it's just that people often feel very disconnected from democracy. And really, at the moment, it's really not a sensible thing to do to mechanically disengage people from democracy. Well, given that the government had until the end of this year to do this deletion, it could affect the EU referendum because, of course, there's an awful lot of people who might have been able to vote who now may not be able to, so there could be an effect there.
After watching the video, we thought about how important it is for young voters to know about this. Voting rights groups repeatedly have challenged states' registration purges, including those in Ohio, Georgia, Kansas, Iowa, Florida, Texas, and Kentucky, all red or purple states. The people who are in charge of purging voters are the Election Directory for Cancellation Notices, which is used by election officials to maintain up-to-date voter registration lists. Provides a comprehensive list of state and local election office addresses for sending cancellation notices. When a new voter to your area reports that they were registered elsewhere, use this guide to find the correct address for notifying the appropriate registration official. Purging residents from the voting registry relates to our theme to essential questions because this topic fits into what happens after having the right to vote. It can be denied if you don't vote within 5 to 6 years. Do you think there should be restrictions on keeping this right? The Supreme Court's Husted v. Philip Randolph Institute ruling in June 2018 concluded that Ohio's voter purge system did not violate any federal laws. The court resolved that Ohio's system uses the lack of voting in multiple elections as one reason for removal, along with the lack of response to the state notices, which includes an address confirmation form. Since a citizen not voting is not the only reason for the removal from the voting registry, they also failed to respond to the notice, either discarding or ignoring. The court said, purging is legal under federal law.
I would be incredibly upset and angry. That did happen to me in Arizona, and it was some discrepancy in the way that I signed something, and it was part of the kind of massacre of the Voting Rights Act that's going on, and of course Arizona is very much part of that project. And they were basically like, oh, your signature on our documents doesn't match your signature on the ballot, so unfortunately we can't let you vote. Well, I made absolutely sure that I fixed that right away. Part of the problem in the United States is that people don't realize when they can fix these things and that they can fix them, but also that this kind of culling of voters based on racial, socioeconomic lines and so on is intentional and by design, and actually needs to be resisted intentionally. And part of the problem is a lot of times people don't even realize that their names have been removed from the registry, right? And by the time they realize it, it's too late because registration deadlines are so far ahead of elections. But if I'm a citizen of the United States, I have the right to vote, period.
I would feel like my rights as like a citizen of the United States have been violated. I think I would feel, I don't know if helpless is the right word, but the fact that there was nothing that I could do, especially when I feel passionate about voting and getting your voice out, I would feel silenced. And then I think I would just feel really disheartened, right? That, for example, like I tried to be a really great citizen, right? And do my civic duty and participate in, like it's something that I feel that every person should be able to do, to vote and to be active, right? In the decisions with regard to the country in which you live in. And not being able to do that, I would just feel really disheartened.
Overall, taking people's rights away is the complete opposite of what a democracy is. A democracy to us is a government where the will of the people determines how they wish to be governed. The act of purging goes against the foundation of being a citizen of the United States because in the Constitution it states one man, one vote. Voting is a basic right and it shouldn't be able to expire. It is selfish of the government officials to disenfranchise minorities who haven't done anything wrong in being a citizen.